Good morning, self-motivated, executable Bible teachers. This morning we will have one more factual Bible study about numbers. So this morning we heard a wonderful factual Bible study from Samuel Abraham Chan about the book of Leviticus, which is 99% law. But Numbers, thankfully, is not so much law. There's a lot of law in it. But we can learn many new things. I want to pray with you. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this GLE forum. Thank you for your great hope, for raising us as self-motivated, executable Bible teachers, and as global leaders for this generation. Thank you that you bless our Bible studies, that we can learn about your word and find the core message and follow your word. Father, thank you that you bless this factual study now. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Shall we read the keywords together? It's Numbers 14, verse 24. Can you read that? Let's go. Behold, servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly. I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Okay, short introduction to the book. The name of the book in Latin is Numeri, and in English, Numbers. And the Hebrew name is Bemidbar, which means in the desert. They always use the first words of the whole book. The author again, Moses, and the subsequent editor, and the time is now from the second year to the 40th year of the wilderness journey. And the content is the history of the wilderness journey from Sinai to the Jordan Valley, and also we find a number of regulations and orders in this book. The places, it starts at Mount Sinai, and then we have a long desert journey, and in the end, Israel arrives at the Jordan Valley, ready to set over to the Promised Land. The main topic of this book is rebellion, unbelief, disobedience. Very disappointing. So, throughout this journey, we continuously find this rebellion, unbelief, and disobedience of the Israelites, which finally result in 40 years of desert training that they have to take. But there is one other main topic, and it's God's faithfulness. Also throughout this book we find God is faithful, although they are disobedient, and the blessing does not disappear from Israel, but it is given to the next generation, and they are actually allowed to enter the Promised Land. And I made a symbol for this book, which basically is a graph of their spiritual situation. They start very well at Sinai. God is in the midst. They have the law, and then they're going to the very, very bottom. But God helps them to come up, and finally they are ready to be God's people in the Promised Land. Okay, we have an overview again. I hope everybody received one of the handouts. Unfortunately, they're not all colored. So I placed the chapters actually in the middle this time. There are 36 chapters of Numbers. And why did I place it in the middle? To the left, you find the history lessons in this book. And to the right, you find the law lessons. So actually there are always changing between law and history. So there are a number of history of law lessons in between. And then at the same time we find this history of their moving from Sinai to the border of the Promised Land. And then first row is who, which is also very important, the yellow color. There is a census at the beginning of this book, and a census almost at the end of the book. So, which tells us who is actually walking. Then the second row is the time. There are just 3 times mentioned in this book, and and then the third row is where they are. So they are at Mount Sinai from the beginning to up to chapter 9. Then they are leaving, and we have all this journey. And actually, in chapter 22, they arrive at the Jordan River, at the border of the Jordan River, and the rest of is then already preparation for going into the Promised Land. And so this history, we can divide the first 8 chapters are preparation for the journey. God gives them many orders how they should walk and throughout the journey. And then we have 2 chapters of the leaving from Mount Sinai, and then the rest here is the journey. And then in the end of the book we find the preparation for and regulations for going into the Promised Land. So again, another preparation. And here, this middle part of this journey, I divided into red and green. I like red and green because there is a lot of rebellion here, the red part, or many rebellion stories. And there is green. This is restoration stories. How God helps them to overcome the rebellion and restore it as a kingdom of priests. Okay, as the book is called Numbers, we have to talk about numbers. We already saw in chapter 1 there's a census, and in chapter 26. So this is the 2nd year, and this is the 40th year. And the first one is at the Mount Sinai before they leave, and this is at the Jordan River just before they entered the Promised Land. And what is the sum of the Israelites? 603,550, 601,730. Almost the same number. And how many people are counted twice in this number? Do you know? 2. Almost nobody is counted twice. It's just Caleb and Joshua, and I think Moses is also counted twice. Everybody else from these 603,000 died in the desert. And this is next generation, new generation. Most of you are next generation. So we see. Exactly, yes. So for the first census, these Israelites are above, they count above 20. So some of these new generation were living, but they were not counted. They're counting actually just 3 more people. So we see God protected his people. Although they were very rebellious, they all had to die, but God kept the number. He brought up a new generation that can take over the role and enter the Promised Land. And the same Levites, as they are counted separately. They are 22,000, and at the second census 23,000. So almost the same number. And this map again, in Exodus we see the journey up to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, and then the whole book of the Leviticus is playing here, and then in Numbers they start to move on. We don't know the exact way. We know that they are in Kadesh Barnea, where the first attempt to enter the Promised Land, where they disobeyed and failed, and then they have to move on a long time in the desert, and finally they have to go around Moab, and so the next time they enter the Promised Land here through the Jordan River. Many of these places are named in the Bible, but we cannot find them on the map. It's really hard to find these places. So timeline, we have first the book of Exodus, then Leviticus, very short time here, and then Numbers covers the second year up to the 40th year, and then Deuteronomy, also very short time, just speeches of Moses before they enter the Promised Land, and then entering the Promised Land is in the book of Joshua, so they are in one row here actually. So we come to part one, the preparation for the wilderness journey. We have a census, we have regulations, we have dedication, and we have the leaving. Yeah, so in chapter 1 we find the first census. We already talked about this. There are 603,550 Levites excluded. And then chapter 2 tells us about the arrangement of the tribes. So they should not just live somewhere, but there was a very special order. So in the middle we have the tabernacle. Around that, the tribe of the Levites. And then around this, into the 4 directions, we have at each side 3 tribes gathered. So order is very important. And the next chapter, chapter 3, tells us about this inner circle, how the tabernacle, and then the Levites, how they are organized. Levi had 3 sons, Merari, Gershom, and Kehath. So they are to 3 sides, and to the east, Moses and Aaron's family separated. And it tells us that the Levites are dedicated to guard in place of the firstborn, and they have to be counted. Differently, the Israelites were counted from age 20, but they are counted from the first month on, and the sum of the Levites was 22,000. And so they are kind of the tenths of the Israelites. They should be given to God. Levites, they belong to God, and when they counted, there was a surplus of a small number of Israelites, so there were not enough Levites, so we had to redeem them with silver. Then in chapter 4 we have the arrangement of loads for the Levites. That was one of their duties, to carry the loads. So from 30 to 50 years of age they had to carry, and Kehath is to carry the holy instruments, and Gershom's, they have to the carpets and the blankets, and Merari for all the boards, and we have a number of 8,500 Levites who are assigned to carry all this. And then chapter 5 is law, offering for jealousy, which tells us that unclean people have to leave the camp. They have to live outside. They cannot live in the camp. And there is sin against people shall be restituted. So if somebody sins against somebody, you have to give 20% extra. And in case of jealousy, because of unfaithfulness, a woman shall be tested under oath. There's a long procedure how to do this. Chapter 6, again, law. It tells us about war and blessing. And there are specific regulations for people who make a special vow to God. They should drink no alcohol, leave their hair uncut, no touching of the dead person. And in case of uncleanness, the period has to start all over again. So if they fail in the middle, they have to start again. And at the end of the vow, there's an offering to be done. We know that from the book of Acts, when Paul pays for this offering of people who made a vow. And in the end of this chapter, we find the priestly blessing, Aaron's blessing, which the church has used for so many centuries. Chapter 7, offering for dedication of the tabernacle. And here the leaders of the tribes, they offer 6 wagons for the Levites. They had to carry so many things. So they gave them 6 wagons to use. And then we find 12 days of offering for the dedication of the altar. There's a very lengthy story which tells us about all the leaders who made that special offering. And actually each of the tribe leaders brought the same offering, each by one day. Chapter 8, dedication of the Levites. It talks about the golden lampstand. The Levites are washed and dedicated for service, and the Levites are a wave offering to the Lord. And it also tells us that the Levites shall serve from age 25 to 50. And then chapter 9, repeating of the Passover, obedience to the cloud. The Passover normally is taken in the first month, and at this time, this happens for the first time, and they probably accused because some people are unclean for some kind of, they touched some deaths or something, so they are unclean and they cannot take the Passover. So they ask, what can we do? And God gives them an advice. There's a second chance for everybody who's unclean or who's traveling abroad. He can take the Passover 1 month later. There's a second chance on second month 14 days. And then it tells us that the Israelites follow the cloud absolutely. We find their obedience to God's leading throughout the whole journey. They follow the cloud for 40 years. Can you follow for 40 years? Not just 2 weeks. Followed by 40 years. Then chapter 10, trumpet blowing and leaving from Sinai. Finally, they set up to the promised land, and they make 2 silver trumpets, and the different signals are given. They had no internet at that time, so they used trumpets, so that everybody can hear when they are going to leave, and when they have to stop, and when an enemy is attacking, and so on. And then second month, 20th day, leaving the desert of Sinai to the desert of Paran. They're actually starting to move again after almost 1 year staying at the Mount Sinai. And Moses asks Hobab, his brother-in-law, for help because he's familiar with the desert. So he asks them to come with them and help them. And there's then leaving the desert of Sinai. So we come to part 2, which is the wilderness journey. And in this part 2, we find the history of rebellion throughout this journey. They had all the laws, God was in the midst, but still, so much rebellion. And we find punishment, and also find God's healing and new beginning in these chapters. So I made an overview of rebellion. So 7 rebellions. 7 rebellions. There's wailing for food, the arrogance of Miriam and Aaron, who did not like to accept Moses as the leader. They want to be same level. There is unbelief of spies who went to the promised land and gave a bad report. Their unbelief and disobedience of the Israelites at that time. Then there's this rebellion of Korah, who did not want to accept the priests. They want to take their position. There is the water of Meribah, the unbelief in God's providence. There is again wailing after food. And there is fornication and idolatry through the seduction of the Midianites. So we have many kinds of rebellion throughout this journey, and also many kind of punishment. Rebellion always results in punishment, God's punishment. There is the Tabea fire, there's the Miriam received leprosy for 1 week. There's a dying in the desert. There's great punishment. 40 years you have to stay in the desert. All adults have to die before they enter the promised land. There's the annihilation of Korah, who just disappeared from the earth. There's the death of Aaron and Moses. They also received punishment because of their unbelief, and they were not allowed to enter the promised land. And there are the poisonous snakes and the death of Zimri. And but there is also healing and hope. So in the first rebellions we don't find this healing. But later, starting from Caleb and Joshua, we find this kind of healing and hope. Because they did not rebel. They tried to convince the Israelites to go into the promised land. Joshua, man of faith. So Joshua and Caleb, they were great men of faith who planted this, where we can see the hope of God. And then we also find Eleazar and Joshua who succeed Aaron and Moses. So there is hope in the next generation. And we find the bronze snake, which healed the Israelites when the poison snakes were there. And then also the seal of Phinehas from Aaron's tribe, who really fought for God's glory, and God was very pleased through his seal. Okay, we take up to chapter 14 and then we take a break. Is that okay? So, chapter 11 is the wailing of the people and quails. So Israel wailing for food, and then when they wailed, there was punishment of fire. There was a kind of floor brand, and the rebel craved for meat instead of manna. Manna was so delicious food, but still they craved for something else. We want something else. And Moses also complained about the burdens of leadership, and God's solution for him was to raise 70 helpers, and for the Israelites to have 1 month eating only meat until it comes out from the ears. 70 elders are filled with the power of the Spirit as co-workers, and God sends quails for 1 month. Every day. God threats on people who crave for food, the Kipros, I don't know how to spell that, Kipros Hatava, the graves of craving, it's called, this place. In chapter 12 we find the arrogance of Miriam and Aaron. They were actually in very high position, but they said, "Oh, we are the same as Moses." Because they thought Moses was not qualified because of his Cushite wife. They were like kind of better, and they wanted to be leaders. And God's solution is He puts them to test and rebukes them. And Miriam was punished with 1 month, with 1 week of leprosy, and had to stay outside of the camp. And so through this chapter we learn to humbly accept God's spiritual order. Very important. And then in chapter 13-14, they already arrived at the border of Canaan. It was actually not such a long way. And they decided to send first some spies to spy out the land. 12 spies, the 12 leaders of the tribes were sent, and their task was to spy out the geography, the inhabitants, and the agriculture of this country. And for 40 days they traveled, and they also brought this wonderful fruit, which they were not even able to carry with 1 man. 2 men had to carry the grapes because they were so big. And so their report was, the land is flowing with milk and honey, just as God promised. But they did not stop there, but they said, "Oh, these people are too powerful. We are not able to go there. We cannot make it. And then Caleb, he had a different position, and he said, we can conquer the land. But all the others planted fear and bad talkings into the people, so they started to rebel. They went in fear and wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to remove Moses and take somebody else as the leader and go back. And Joshua and Caleb encouraged them. They work hard to have faith in God. And also God is very upset. He wants to strike Israel, but Moses intercedes for them. And God finally punishes them to stay for 40 years in the desert. If you don't want to go, then stay here. You have to stay here for 40 years in the desert. And the children about you fear about your children, but they will inherit the land. And Joshua and Caleb, they are accepted because they glorified God. And then, when they heard this, the Israelites, they changed their mind. No, we want to go into the land. And they tried with their own strength also, God said, don't do it. And they were stricken from the Canaanites. So unbelief is a rebellion, and if we rebel, it's impossible to enter the promised land. So this is the, I think, the main, the high point of Numeri, and we take a break of 5 minutes here. So we come to chapter 15, offerings, which tells us about offerings, unintentional sins, and tassels. So all offerings should be brought together with the food offering. For nationals and foreigners, the same laws apply. Very modern law, actually. And offering of the first of the ground meal in the promised land. Offering for unintentional sins. And the story of a Sabbath breaker who is put to death. And it's taught that the vessels are a reminder of the law. The tassels, they have to be on the vessels. And chapter 16 and 17 tell us about the rebellion of Korah. So this is an interesting story. Korah's people, which were actually from the tribe of the Levites, they wanted to be recognized as priests, just as Aaron and his descendants. But they did not accept that Aaron was priest. They wanted to be same. And Moses rebukes them very harshly. And God decides he wants to show his choosing on the next day. So he orders everybody to come to the tent. And also there is a story of Dathan and Abiram, who did not want to obey Moses anymore. He called back and he said, no, thank you. We have our own plan. The rebels are swallowed by earthquake. A very horrific story. Earth opens up, big hole, and everybody on this tribe just disappears. And also, then it's called that the Census of Korah, who brought the
over, please come
to God, had to be used for the altar because it once was used
over.
in a holy way. We should not just use it for something else. And then Israel's again. So we are told to keep the time. 3 minutes are over. They think, and punishment is too hard. Actually, it was God's punishment. We don't and want because of this to remain at that spiritually low point of Israelites. Had to die from God's plague. Right. But Aaron, he works hard. Lowest point during the destiny journey. He runs through the camp to sanctify the people and stop this plague. And then God orders another thing. 12 staffs are placed into God's tent, from one staff from each tribe. And on the next morning, Aaron's staff, he has buds. So God really shows through this miracle that he chooses Aaron and his descendants as priests. Yeah, God punishes rebellion against God's appointed servants. Chapter 18, duty and privileges of the priests and Levites. So this is law again. Levites serve the priests, but are not allowed to use the holy instruments. They should keep to their duty. And Aaron's sons receive the holy offerings, and the Levites do not receive any land, but instead they receive the tenth of the Israelites. And the Levites have to give their tenth to Aaron's sons. Chapter 19, water of cleansing. It is produced from the ash of a cow, and it can be used for a special cleansing ceremony. If somebody has touched a dead person, he can be cleansed by this water. Chapter 20, water of Meribah, the death of Miriam and Aaron. So it tells us that Miriam dies in Kadesh in the desert of Sin. Israelites wail again because of a lack of water. And we already heard about this story. Moses hits the rock twice. Instead of obeying and waiting for God, in his anger he hits the rock so that the water pours out. And because of this action of unbelief, because it did not glorify God, Moses and Aaron are not allowed to enter the promised land. It also tells us that Edom does not allow the Israelites to move through their country. They asked, can we please just follow the road, we don't take nothing, we pay everything. But Edom did not allow, so they had to take a long detour around Edom to come to the Canaan. And also Aaron dies at Mount Hor, and Eleazar, his son becomes the high priest. And then 21a, the bronze snake. Canaanites attack Israel, and at this time they are defeated, the Canaanites. And Israel again wails about bread and water. And because of their wailing, this time God sends poisonous snakes to bite them in the camp. And but Moses he is given a command to make a bronze snake. So everybody who looks up to the bronze snake, he will not die from this poisonous snakes. We see God's salvation through the obedience of faith. And Jesus also used this story to explain how we can be saved through faith in the one who is exalted like the bronze snake. Okay, then we come to chapter 3, the preparation for the conquest. We find, so they now arrive at the border of the Jordan River, and we find the victory over Sihon and Og. We find Balaam, who must bless Israel. We find the second census, and we find also many regulations, and then the distribution of the Transjordan countries and inheritance. Way to Moab, victory over Sihon and Og. There's a long detour to the Ammon of the Moabites. And when they come into this land, there are two kings, Sihon of Heshbon and Og of Bashan. And they decide to attack Israel. Israel did not attack them. They just wanted to move through Canaan, but they deliberately attacked Israel, and they were annihilated, both of them. And so this Transjordan country became vacant, and it was given to the Israelites later. Chapter 22 to 24, Israel was now in Moabite country, and the Moabites were very fearful before Israel. And Balak, their king, did not attack. He thought he was more smart, not attack Israel, but he called for Balaam, who was a very well-known prophet, and he should come and curse Israel. But Balaam does not follow because God did not allow it to him. But Balak was very clever, so he took a lot of money and sent it to Balaam until he actually followed the money and came to Moab. And Balak then they bring offerings, Also we find the story of the donkey who actually saves Balaam before the angels, because Balaam's spiritual eyes were totally closed at that time, but even the donkey could see the big danger. Balak brings offering in Bamot Baal and prepares everything. So Balak expected now that Israel is cursed, but when Balaam started his speech, he only was able to bless Israel because God told him so. And this procedure is repeated 2 times. I think maybe something's wrong here, we go to a different place. But anyway, always he had to bless Israel, and finally he also gives the promise that a star out of Jacob will come, which refers to Jesus. And through these chapters we see that God turns curse for Israel into blessing for Israel. So God's people are so much blessed. Chapter 25, Fornication and Idolatry, a seal of Pinhas. The Moabites and the Midianites, they did not give up. They had an even more, one trick more, and they sent their young girls, actually, young women. And so they deceived the Israelites into fornication and idolatry. And God is very angry. He wants all the elders of Israel to be hanged. Actually, 24,000 people died. And then there's the story of Phinehas, who kills Zimri and Cosby, who were actually from the good families, but they openly started vowing, and so he goes into their tent with a spear and pierces them out, both. And God is so pleased with Phinehas because of his zeal for God, that he says, "Oh, because of this zeal, all the sins are forgiven." God blesses Phinehas, for he was zealous for the Lord. In chapter 26, we find the second census. We already talked about this. And the point I learned through the census is that God keeps his people, and the blessing is going over to the next generation. Chapter 27, Inheritance of Daughters, Joshua to succeed Moses. There's a story of Zelophehad's daughters who asked for their inheritance because they had no brothers to take the inheritance. And in this case, then God decides the daughters have to take the inheritance. It says that Moses shall not enter the promised land at that time, and Moses prays for a successor so that his people may not go without a shepherd, and that Joshua is called as a successor to Moses. Chapter 28 and 29, there's an order for the offerings on the different days, which very detailed, given for all the special feasts, which offerings have to be taken. You can look that up. Don't go to this in detail. In chapter 13, vows a woman. So a vow has to be kept, absolutely. That's God's command. But for women, there's an exception. If the husband learns about it and does not approve it, he can take that back and she's free from this vow. Or also the father can do that in case of unmarried woman. Chapter 31, vengeance on the Midianites. The Midianites had tricked the Israelites into idolatry. And though this time 12,000 soldiers are sent out to the Midianites, and all the Midianites are killed except the young girls, and the prey is spread between the army and the people, and there is a special tax for God, and there's a thanksgiving offering of money from the Israelites, because in this time not one soldier of Israel died. So they're very thankful and give a special offering. And then chapter 32, Transjordania is given to Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Reuben and Gad, they had a a lot of livestock, and so they asked for this land, and Moses says, "Oh, you think of the rebellion, you're rebellious people, you don't want to go to Canaan." But Reuben and Gad, they actually agree, no, we like to take this land, but we will go to Canaan before our brothers and fight for them. And only women and children have to stay in Transjordania. So this country east of Jordan is given to them. And here we learn to fight to the end, fight for the others until everybody has received his inheritance. 32, list of resting places in the wilderness journey. There's a summary of all these resting places given. 34, border of Canaan and land distribution committee. Exactly described what is Canaan, what are the borders, and then they set up a committee who has to distribute it to the 12 tribes. 35, cities for the Levites, murder and killing. So there are 48 cities especially dedicated to the Levites. They don't get any land. They have special cities where they can live, and they get some land for their livestock. And among these, there are 6 refugee cities for people who are suspected of murder. So they may not be immediately killed, but they can go there, be protected until they actually are brought to court. And there are also a distinction, what is murder, what is unintentional killing. So for all the law students, very interesting chapter. Daughters who inherit must marry within their own tribe. Again, Zelophehad's daughters. They found out there might be a problem if daughters marry and also get an inheritance. If they marry to a different tribe, then all the land comes to the different tribe. So if they get an inheritance, they have to marry within their own tribe. There's a responsibility for their inheritance. Yeah, one word that I learned: God is faithful. Amen. Although man is very faithful, we are rebellious, but God is very faithful. He brought Israel to the land. He gave it to the next generation. The promise is not lost, but it's given to Israel. And rebellion and disobedience, if we have rebellion and disobedience, we will not inherit the land. That's a great problem. We are rebellious. And God fulfills His promise. God is faithful.
Good morning. I just want to summarize Factual study from Numbers. I learned that God is faithful. That is why we have hope, even though we have many weaknesses and shortcomings. Second thing is, the next generations, they are really blessed. Because for 40 years, they had to be trained, they had to be taught, and also God prepared the promised land for things like for the second generations. So GLE Forum, our young generations, they are really blessed. From their young age, God trained them, God taught them to bless them with a wonderful promised land.
Amen.
So that through them, the gospel may be preached to the ends of the earth. And also thank God for teaching us that rebellion is unbelief. Many people, another thing is I learned that God is God of order. Many people misunderstand about the nature. Nature absolutely obey God's order. Only mankind are able to somehow rebel against God. I learned that under God's rule, under God's order, we truly enjoy the freedom. Otherwise, there will be God's eternal punishment. Thank God for giving us the way to come to Jesus, come to God through the blood of Jesus. The 40 years training is like a sanctification process. So though we are sinners, we have hope because there is the blood of Jesus. So let us really depend on the blood of Jesus and enter the promised land through our Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
So we're gonna have a 10 minutes break. We're gonna have a 10 minutes break, and after that, please, there will be question making workshop.